Hi, I'm Suneera Madhani, and I'm a mom of two, a daughter of an immigrant, and an unlikely entrepreneur who went from scaling an idea to a billion-dollar business. Yes, a billion-dollar business. Along the way, I learned that less than 2% of female founders ever hit 1 million in revenue, and I became obsessed on a mission to change that. I believe that there is so much gatekeeping in business knowledge, and that we as female entrepreneurs should be learning from other female founders and leaders who have broken the statistics. Since I never went to CEO school, I've had to learn it all the hard way, but you shouldn't have to, because we believe that you deserve to have it all. And honestly, nothing bad happens when women make more money. Grab a seat because class is officially in session. Welcome to CEO School. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CEO School podcast. I'm your host, Suneera Madhani, and today I get to interview Emma Hinchliffe. Emma Hinchliffe is a senior writer at Fortune, where she covers women in business and gender issues across business, politics, and culture. She's also the author of a really big newsletter you may have heard of, Broadsheet, Fortune's daily newsletter for and about the world's most powerful women. And she's also the co-chair of Fortune's Most Powerful Women Summit, where she interviews everyone from the biggest leaders of TikTok to Glossier to US senators to Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, and it also recently including Kim Kardashian. Emma and I have been friends now for, over the last several years online. And I started following Emma just because we're kind of in the same circles of women supporting women. And it's funny when you start to really get into the world of women supporting women, it's incredible how just interconnected our worlds are. And Emma has always been just a girl's girl and supports women across all different industries. She's personally covered me, and she has also covered so many of my friends as well. And so I'm so excited to interview her today. And this is the first time, Emma, that we've ever had a journalist on the show. And so I'm so excited to get to know the behind the scenes of not only, what it's like at Fortune, but what it's like as just a female journalist as well. So thank you for being here.
I'm so honored to be your first journalist.
No, I'm so excited that you're here. And you have literally covered the most powerful women and the most successful women, including myself,
Of course.
including myself. No, it has been so fun to watch your journey as a journalist. And I think you have this incredible style as well. And it's not just about covering female entrepreneurs or startups. You also cover, Fortune 500, and you're sharing a lot about just the landscape for women and women's rights and politics and everything in between. And it's a big load to carry. And so I just want to thank you for being a voice for all of us and doing it so eloquently. And it's a newsletter that has been on my subscribe list from before we even met. And so it's been part of my my day-to-day and my week-to-week. And so just congrats on all the success that you've had at Fortune. Could you share a little bit about your background, Broadsheet, and what you do for Fortune?
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for having me, Suneera. It's such a pleasure to, sit down with you and get some time to talk. So I have been at Fortune for about 5.5 years, and I now write our newsletter, The Broadsheet, which is a daily newsletter 5 days a week. We say it's for and about the world's most powerful women. So we cover female founders, we cover Fortune 500 CEOs, we cover, leading women in politics and culture. So whether that's, the vice president or someone like the Duchess of Sussex, when we've had news in the past, it really can cover anything across the board. And, that's what you said about, women's issues, is that there's a lot to cover. There's so much going on. And I think sometimes it gets kind of pigeonholed, but really depends on how you define it. And women's issues, and including in business, is just such an expansive topic. So there's always something to write about every single day.
But 5 days a week, I have so many questions on how you have the time to write that newsletter like every single day and then be relevant on top of, and especially as a journalist, it's not just your opinion, right? There's parts of it that are going to be your take on and your viewpoints and the stories that you're sharing, but there is a lot of work as a journalist that goes into creating a publication or putting out content that is correctly sourced and fact checked as well. And so I'd love to kind of what's that process like?
Yeah, that's definitely a really important part of writing anything, newsletters included. So, we're always conducting interviews, responding to the news. So, like you said, something about a newsletter is that it does give you, it really has a direct connection with readers. When people open something in their inbox every day, they feel a really personal connection to it versus just, clicking in a story online where you read it and then you move on. 5 days a week really built a relationship with the reader. So when we do that, there's more of a license to share some level of a take on the news or even just provide context and perspective. So that's something we're always doing, as well as, conducting interviews, bringing in sources like data, and really making sure that we're providing a full picture of the story.
That's incredible. And I know recently, so I definitely want to talk about Fortune's Most Powerful Women Summit that takes place every year in the fall. But this year, you got to cover, so we've all seen the Fortune magazine issue with Kim Kardashian on the cover. I know you wrote that story, and how I knew that you wrote that story was because Kim Kardashian's birthday. And I definitely follow, I'm actually a huge Kim K fan. I think she is one of the most incredible women in business. And I definitely think that there's a lot to learn from this woman and her work ethic and just her hustle, her drive, and her brilliance in how she executes. And I follow her, and she posted it was her birthday, or it was it was an event, and it was on her sheet cake was the Fortune cover that you had written, and somebody had tagged, shared it and retagged, and I'm like, oh my God, I know Emma. Emma wrote this story, and I was just it was so exciting. So tell me about writing that issue and profiling that whole story about Kim Kardashian. Tell me everything. Yeah, all the deets.
That was definitely a big moment. I think, when you are writing for Fortune, Fortune has a really broad reach. A lot of people read it, but being on Kim's birthday cake is definitely a new one. I don't think any other Fortune story, I don't know if Fortune had ever been on a birthday cake before, let alone Kim's. So that was exciting for sure. But yeah, obviously, like you said, Kim has done so much in business. And so for us at Fortune covering, powerful women over the years, obviously you're always going to have her on your radar about okay, we should do a Kim story at some point. What should that story be? And I was really interested last year to see that she was launching a private equity firm called Sky Partners. And so I think that gave us a really interesting angle to take because, of course, Skims is a huge business and it's grown so much since it launched in the past few years. And there have been a lot of Skims stories versus Sky was, more of a new venture. Obviously, being in the finance space, it was, really core to the Fortune audience. It's run by an alum of Carlyle. So, it's a real firm. And so we were really excited to tell a story about Kim through that lens of her entry into private equity, which is definitely new for, celebrities. I think most celebrities have been involved in perhaps venture capital and angel investing, but launching a whole private equity firm is a different ballgame.
It is a completely different ballgame. And kudos to Kim for launching a private equity company because it is a completely different structure than angel investing or venture investing. I think that's so cool. How long did that profile take to complete?
Yeah, I would say from outreach of, getting in touch with Kim's team and seeing if this was something they'd be interested in participating in to publish, it was probably about 5 months. Writing the story was a bit of a deadline, between conducting the interviews and going to print. It was only about, 2 weeks or so.
Did you do them in person? Tell me how did you conduct these interviews? What was the security level like?
Oh yeah, no, I think, Kim's really smart and she's really involved in a lot of the decision making. So, we talked over the phone for about an hour and then did the photo shoot in New York here. So we, met in person when she was doing the shoot for Fortune and chatted a little bit there as well.
Well, that's so incredible. I'm excited to see your name on that story. I'm always excited to see your name, but that was just a really fun pop culture moment. And that's really cool. Who are some of the other, what are some of the most favorite topics that you cover, some of the women that you've covered that you've just, some stories that you'd love to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think something about the Most Powerful Women franchise at Fortune, which the Broadsheet is part of, is that, obviously it's focused on women, but beyond that, it's really focused on people. And so, when you're interviewing an executive, obviously you're talking about the business that they're running and their strategy and the most pressing issues they're facing, but it's also about who they are, their career, the path that led them to the role they're in today, you know, anything about their personal story that has really influenced how they approach their work. So, you know, that's something that's always on our mind and is a reason that, you know, I personally write a lot of profiles for Fortune when it comes to long magazine length pieces. So in addition to Kim, which was really fun and, you know, reaches new audiences for Fortune, which is great. You know, I've also profiled Melanie Perkins, who's the founder of Canva. That's the most valuable female founded and women led startup in the world. Yes.
In the world.
Yeah. And so I went down to Sydney, Australia for that to spend some time with her team and with her.
What a fun job.
Yeah, it really takes you all over the place. Yeah.
She's so incredible. I've been profiled alongside her. I've never met her in person, but when we were minted unicorn a couple of years back, like there's a lot of lists that get like flown around and there's not a lot of women on the unicorn plus list. And I'm a Canva user, but I've always wanted to interview her. Maybe you can make that introduction. I've always wanted to interview her. She's incredible. And what she's doing with all the success is also amazing. So, okay. So Melanie Perkins, and you got to meet her in Australia. And who else has been fun?
Yeah, we did a cover story that was about women who achieved billion-dollar exits. That was at the beginning of 2022. So those exits were in 2021. One of which was Sarah Blakely when she sold her majority ownership in Spanx. So that was a fun one as well. Kind of about, you know, something that must resonate with you and your listeners about kind of building a company in a non-traditional way and really prioritizing ownership versus just like, you know, fundraising from the outset and, you know, focusing on the venture capital route.
I think it's so incredible. You've gotten a chance now as a journalist to sit with so many incredible women. What are some of like the traits that you find? So like I want to switch it into gear of like, what are the things that you notice about the women that you're interviewing are the most successful, most powerful women in the world that you cover? Are there any things like, what are the things that stand out to you that you see in common across these women?
Yeah, I think a lot of the women who have achieved, you know, this level of success, whether it's founding a startup or in their career to then achieve a CEO job, you know, they're very focused. I think they are really, when they, you know, think about their own careers or about their company, you know, they really have a vision and they really have a plan and they go after it. For instance, Melanie from Canva is a great example. You know, when she was, you know, still in college, she had a 10-year plan for Canva. And when she was in Australia, and no Australian startup had ever really kind of cracked that tippy top of the startup ecosystem before, you know, she really had that plan and that vision. And then here she is 10 years later, and that vision has come to life, and she's, you know, kind of moving into phase 2 for the company, versus a lot of women who become Fortune 500 CEOs, you know, have had that similar mindset of knowing early in their career that this is something they want to do and pursuing the jobs that would get them there. So whether that's having a job that has, you know, the right amount of P&L for them to really have that on their resume and prove that they know how to run a business unit before they get the top job to run the business is really important. So that determination and focus, I would say, are 2 top qualities.
Those are great qualities to have. And I love that you said focus. I fully agree with that. I feel like as women, we are so multidimensional. And in order for us to really succeed, we have to get blindly focused on like seeing that path and seeing it through. And it does require that level of focus. And focus also means it means saying no to things. Mm-hmm. And as women, we're terrible about saying no to things. And it just kind of goes back to that point of why it's so important to be able to get things off of your plate, say no to things so that you can get really focused on the things that you are setting out to do for that level of success. I love that, it's really about the determination and about having that clear focus. What would you say, like in the women's space, I also want to ask you, it's changing so much. You cover a lot more than business. There's a lot happening, from gender issues and, just like human rights issues. What are some of the changes that you're seeing, in this space, and like, how has that changed the way that you are reporting and the stories that you're telling?
Yeah, the women's media space has been through a lot of change in the past, decade or so. There were a lot of, publications that were specifically focused on covering women through a certain lens. And, a lot of those have shut down in the past 5 years or so. Most recently, Jezebel shut down, one of the earliest feminist blogs and online publications before it was just revived very recently. And so, I think for us at Fortune, we cover women's issues, but kind of mostly through the lens of business, while also engaging on some of these other topics that really drive the news cycle. And so, just understanding that, like, we're still here, we're still doing this, we're covering women's issues in a way that makes sense for Fortune. And, just because the space is challenged doesn't mean, that we are just taking that responsibility very seriously and continuing to make sure that the broadsheet is relevant to readers 5 days a week and to cover stories that matter to women in Fortune. Just because some publications are shutting down doesn't mean women's stories go away. So it just really proves the importance that we, stay committed to what we're doing.
And even just like, media is changing so much, and how we consume media, how we consume information. What are you doing actively as, I'm going to ask this as a journalist and as, a writer for Fortune as well, and what Fortune's doing to stay relevant and to, meet the audience where they want to be met at. Because I would say, I don't remember the last time that I picked up, the only time I pick up a magazine is on an airplane, when I'm like at an airport,
or when you're on the cover,
or or when a friend is on a cover, or when a friend is writing a magazine, and then I'm like, oh, I want to pick up that issue. That's but yes, or so it's really, print is not where I get my news and my information. How are you adapting, or how's Fortune adapting to what's happening in the media space? And there's so much content now. And it's hard to really be there's so much noise and it's competitive.
Yeah, Fortune has, a great strategy for the publication as a whole, that a lot of my colleagues implement to really meet readers where they are. But I think something that,
Which is what? What is that?
Yeah, well, I think something that, I've learned from running the broadsheet is that newsletters and print really have a lot in common.
Okay.
In that it's kind of about curation. So there's a lot of noise out there, like you said, but if you can, really select and show readers, this is what I think is important. This is what I think you should be reading today or this month. That really, readers kind of have that sense of trust with a newsletter, with a print magazine. And so a lot of the, habits that took place when people did read magazines more regularly, some of those are being replicated specifically in the newsletter format. So, when editors at Fortune are, choosing which stories go in the magazine every month, that's about curation. And when we're choosing which stories to cover in the broadsheet every day, that's also about curation. So that's one of the top skills we can bring to readers today.
I think that's an interesting point that you made, because I would say that you're right on the trust level. On what I like about the broadsheet is I don't have to think about what's important for the day. And I do think it's important, especially in business, we have to stay relevant and be aware of what's taking place in the world. And if somebody can take because there's so much content that's out there, and I subscribe to the publications that I subscribe to, and I usually get most of the headlines. Social media is also where I get content from the publications that I trust, not from everyone, but from the people that I trust. But I would say that it's still very clickbaity on social media, but where the newsletter is different, it's here's the most relevant things that I need to know about that are happening in fintech for me. And this is curated for that. And this is what's happening, in business and for women in business. And I have my publications for that. So I actually really agree with there's a huge place for that. And for the women that are not reading on, don't have something like that on a day-to-day, it is so important for you to have the right content coming into your inbox, because, you want to make sure that it's reputable and it's correct and it's from the right, it's the information that you need so that you could stay relevant also in the conversations that take place every single day. So I fully agree with that.
And something about the broadsheet that we try to do is that, we're speaking to our audience of readers as, whole people. So a lot of our audience is executives and founders, and, they want to know the top business stories driving the news, but they're also women, and a lot of them are parents. And so we're talking about issues like childcare. There are also people who care about the world around them. We're talking about issues like reproductive rights. So it's really not putting those different topics into silos and kind of figuring out how they all make sense together.
I love that. Absolutely. I wanted to also kind of talk a little bit about the conference that you co-chair. So tell me a little bit about Fortune's Most Powerful Women Summit. What's happening there? How do women, who are we covering? What's the scene like? Tell me about the WPW.
Yeah. So the Most Powerful Women Summit is a conference and community that has been around for more than 25 years now. So it predates me for sure. But it is a gathering every year and a community of, top women leaders in business. So a lot of those folks are Fortune 500 CEOs and executives. In recent years, there's been more and more venture capitalists and founders and bringing in folks who have other types of experience. So it's really, a gathering that brings together women who have similar experiences, levels, are at a similar level in their careers to really, reflect on some of those careers, network, and, hear from some conversations on stage. That is where, me and other Fortune journalists come in to conduct onstage interviews that are relevant to that audience.
Oh my God, it sounds amazing. I cannot wait to be there this year. I just love a room full of like just women supporting women and like at any level. I think it's so important to just get in the room. We can only do so much behind our, our screens and stay connected in other ways, but just being in the room and, it's so important. And honestly, you came to our EAT dinner 2 years ago. We hosted a beautiful EAT dinner here in New York City, and I invited Emma, and it was like the first time we met in person. We've been, digital friends for a while, but it just changes the game when you actually do get to connect with a human, like human to human, and, have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or connect over a meal and, take that connection further. And I think that it's so important, especially for women at every stage. It's so lonely in our journeys, and it is collaboration and just those meaningful relationships, and doing it in person is so important. So get in the room, check out and follow all the things that Emma is doing. We'll be sharing her Instagram handles and everything in the show notes, as well as all of the links to the newsletter and into the Fortune's Most Powerful Summit, all the things. So you can click over into the show notes here shortly. But Emma, we've got lots of entrepreneurs in the room listening, and they want to be covered. I want their stories to be covered. As a prominent journalist, I'm sure you get in my mind, I'm like, you're receiving 1,000 pitches a day. What is it like on your side, and how are you finding the stories that you want to share? And so I'd love for you to give the women a sneak peek of your world, but also give them advice and tips on what they can do to have their stories shared with, publications like Fortune.
Yeah, I think, yes, you're right that, as journalists, we get lots and lots of pitches every day. And, I think the thing that's most important is really knowing who you're pitching to and knowing your audience. So for me, of course, I cover women in business. So an easy one is if, your startup does not have a woman founder on the table, it's probably not a fit for me to cover it. So that's just a basic one as an example that people sometimes miss. But, for founders, I think especially early stage founders who, are really trying to get that first coverage, I think just thinking about your startup and your company and your mission in a broader sense is really helpful, because sometimes people come in and they're so focused on, this is what I'm doing and this is what I can talk about. But for a publication that mostly covers later stage businesses, I think, that's sometimes not a fit. And it's that's awesome that that's what you're doing, but, maybe it makes more sense for us to reconnect in a year or two when there's a little bit more there for us to talk about. But if you can talk about, how your startup fits in with a broader industry trend, or, a personal story that you have that is really just compelling to readers, no matter what stage your business is in, those things can really add a lot of narrative and a lot of interest for readers to your story. So just being open to having wider conversations that are not just about, this is what my startup is, this is, how much money we've raised, this is where I came from, this is what I'm doing, and really talking about, this is how my startup fits into a category, being open to talking about that category, talking about your personal journey. I think those things all can really make a story more interesting to a different audience.
I think that that's such great advice. It's about doing your research too, and knowing what topics are relevant. And even if it's not the startup size right now, but it's how can I be part of the conversation, the broader conversation that's taking place, and almost doing the work for the journalist, right? Not necessarily, you have a lot of work to do, but I think it's being what's important to Emma and what she's covering and the stories that she's covering or the topics that she's covering. And it's not about, and taking you off the table. It's not about you. It's not about your particular, that part will come through the story, hopefully, and your personal journey will come through there. But it's what value can that you add to that journalist or that topic or that broader industry thing that's taking place, and that allows your startup or your story to have a place in that conversation. And I think that is such great advice. And what is like the best means, right? So I'm sure like people reach out like every which way. What works for you? Like what works for like most journalists that you're like, actually I prefer, or is it different across every journalist?
Yeah, I think I would say most journalists probably prefer, email for just pitches that are like not with someone who you have an ongoing relationship with. So just, not, I would say like a Twitter DM is not the best platform to for a pitch for, a story for Fortune. But yeah, but
do you get a lot of those?
Sometimes we do, yeah. But, I think that's something that's important as well, is just like developing relationships and being open to chatting with journalists. For things that they're working on that maybe are not, a profile of your exact business, but, are, you can provide some industry expertise that you've learned from building in the category, or being open to, participating in a story on a quick deadline when a journalist is in need of a source that's not necessarily fully focused on you and your company, but you're, weighing in and providing a quick bit of expertise there. Those things can really help and make it more of a relationship rather than a, one-to-one, like I'm pitching you and you do a story and now we're done.
Yeah, no, I think that it's such great advice. And what advice do you have for like, do you think that these startups or founders need to have an agency, a PR agency, a publicist? Like, does that matter? Does that play into effect? How do you view it as a journalist?
Yeah, I think a great story is a great story no matter where it comes from. But, I think sometimes for early stage founders, it does help to have a little bit of perspective because, founders are obviously really passionate about their businesses, really close to their businesses. And it can help to have a bit of a wider view from a third party who can come in and say, nice. Coming in as an outsider, here's what I think is most interesting. Because obviously as a founder, you're very close to it and everything is interesting, but having a bit of perspective does help.
Okay, I think I hear what you're saying. I think as founders, we're like so in it, right? That you're just like, we can't see it. Or like I do appreciate that honest perspective of like, it is nice when you have a third party like speaking on your behalf that's just like, let's zoom out a bit. And we can be intense. Like we can be like, here's all of this shit that we're doing. And I know this for myself even. And that's why I've always had, as soon as I could, like I was able to afford having an agency, a PR agency, I've sought that support from it because I do think that we are so in it. Sometimes it's nice to have somebody else like pull you out of it and be like, here's what's actually taking place in the world. Like this is where we can apply what we're working on to share that story. I appreciate that honest feedback. So email, doing your research, knowing your audience, having that right broader approach can help get you into the right door. And you also said it's the relationship. Again, it goes back to like relationships are so important and it's not going to happen overnight, but building these relationships, being in the right rooms is going to allow you to rub shoulders with the right people as well. And I do think that that's so important. Okay. So Emma, what are the topics? What's happening in your world? What are the things that you want to be covering or, just what's happening in your world that we can support you with?
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking for great stories. So if you have one, please feel free to send me an email. We can get in touch.
Oh, she's doing it. She's doing it.
But yeah, I think,
how can we get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can email me. My email is my first last name at Fortune. So it's pretty easy to find.
Wow. Thank you for that.
Yeah. But, something as well that is important is just, thinking about the wider world. And so we're interested in stories that, can say something about, challenges women are facing in their career. Ways the world is changing and evolving, issues like reproductive rights that I mentioned and how those are affecting the business community, just like really kind of taking that broader lens. Those are always stories that we're interested in.
That's incredible. Well, thank you so much for spending your time here with us. I know you've got so much work to do. What's your routine like to get all of this out? Like thank you for all your work. I do want to take a moment. It's a really hard job, your job to as a journalist. And I just respect it so much. And I just want you to know how appreciated this, like, I know the work. I have friends that are journalists and the work that it takes to make sure that the thing goes out correctly. And you have a daily newsletter, anything. I could never in my life do anything daily. Just a social media post, writing that, I think is enough already. So how do you do it? How do you what's your work day like? How do you balance your time? Like, what's the day in the life like?
Yeah, so the broadsheet comes out, around 9:30 a.m. Eastern time in the morning, Monday through Friday. So usually the day before, we're prepping the newsletter, writing an opening essay. That is like where we dive into one story a little further, as well as curating news from around the internet from various publications that are like the top stories that we think our audience would be interested in that day. So, it's really about reading widely, staying connected, following other journalists and seeing the work they're doing. As well as, really staying close to the news cycle and figuring out what's a story that makes sense for the broadsheet to weigh in on and provide our own perspective on. And then just always connecting with interesting people. So founders, executives, to just always be in touch with them so that we can always have an interview to plug in to talk to a founder and executive about something going on in their world or their business on the days when there's not like a major global news story driving the news. And then as well, also splitting time between working on other stories for Fortune and our conference business.
So just constant working and reading and writing and reading and working and reading
well, I know,
and writing.
You know that life.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. We were supposed to end, but I have one final question for you. What do you read? What are your top things that you listen to, read? What are your newsletters and your media of choice? What do you listen to?
Yeah, I definitely read widely and watch and listen to a wide variety of stuff. Of course, like you mentioned, I'm always interested in things that my friends are writing and reading. I think it's in the women's space as well. It's interesting to follow people who are covering women's issues or business through a different lens as well. So for instance, a friend of mine named Michaela McKenzie had a book come out recently about how women's sports are really a driving force in shaping the future of feminism. And so, something like that. It's like, oh, the broadsheet, we cover women's sports sometimes, but here's a great perspective on how it's really such a force in culture right now. So that's super interesting. I read obviously the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times for, the major stories driving the news cycle. The 19th does great coverage of women in politics and policy. So there's definitely a wide variety of things to be reading all the time.
Oh my goodness. It's incredible. Thank you for all you do, Emma. And thank you for being so generous with your time today. I know how precious it is. And I know you got to get back to work, but I also appreciate you sharing with our women. This is a real Fortune journalist that we have here that she just gave us all. You're going to I hope this is going to be amazing. Y'all make me proud. Okay. So please do your research and send her the right stories correctly. And I'm just so excited. I really appreciate all that you've done for me. I know how important the right person telling your story also is. And it's incredible to have women like you who really just champion women at their core and at their heart. And it's not just some other guy who's telling our story. And so I just want to thank you for all that you do and just appreciate your time here at CEO School.
Thank you so much, Suneera.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma. We'll see you next week at CEO School.
Thank you for tuning into today's show. If you loved it, leave us a review. We are so proud to bring you authentic conversations, game changer expert guests, and valuable content on and offline. The best compliment you can give us is by screenshotting today's show and tagging us on Instagram at CEO School and at Suneera Madhani. We are obsessed with swag, so don't be surprised if we want to send you some. Thanks for tuning into class today, and remember, nothing bad happens when women make more money.